أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Alhamdulillah. This presentation here is the first of several videos I intend to make available, first of all, to you who are my long-term clients, we could say. We've worked together, let's put it that way. We've worked together for some time. In these videos, I want to present some of the material that I have already presented, and for many of you it will be reiteration of many things, but I want to make them available so that it's clear, because I feel what I want to present are very foundational to the work I do, and foundational for the work that I am intending to develop with your help and with others' help, in which I believe we can draw from our Islamic heritage, our guidance, our deen, the Quran and Hadith, and the scholars that have been Muslim for so long. I believe that we can draw from that body of material common sense wisdoms, hikmas is the term I use. We can draw from it many that will serve to be foundational and basic elements and principles in our healing process and for healing of others as well. These things I call hikmas, excuse me, are wisdoms. We could translate a hikmah as a wisdom, but they're kind of common sense wisdoms. They're things that we know and that come out of many cultures commonly because they have common sense to them, common to many cultures, to many times. And that brings me to one of the points of a true hikmah. True wisdom is something that does not go out of fashion. It's not supplanted by some new scientific discovery. In fact, these discoveries that we make all the time are things that, if they're sound, they will substantiate these hikmas and be commentary on them, we could say, proof of them, and more clearly establish the wisdom inherent in them, and hence they to be called hikmas. So, having said that, there are many things I want to share, many things I've already shared with many of you in our sessions. These particular videos are meant to be material that's kind of didactic and principled, that are foundational for the work that I may do with you individually, either with homeopathic remedies or somatic one-on-one or on counseling. And sometimes, to be honest, with simply just talk. And to be honest, I'll talk more about this later, but to be honest, sometimes just simply talk about things that don't really seem related to very specific things of healing or to your problems. But there's a deep wisdom in how we can speak about something, and it can influence things that are not in the mainstream or the obvious things in the topic. So if I were to begin with any one hikmah, one wisdom, one particular principle, it would be the one that I take from Quran, in which Allah says, in the alternation of day and night is a sign. And in this case, he does not say it's a sign for the people of remembrance or reflection. Allah says a sign for the Ulul Albab, the people of the core understanding of things, the people of deep understanding is usually how that is translated. And I take this as a kind of very primary hikmah, very primary principle, in that what that describes is the alternation of day and night. What an awesome and what an elemental thing that is. Something that we've seen over and over and over. The sun rising in the sky and settling at night. And this is something that immediately applies to understanding of the self and our bodies and many other things. But when it comes to the self and our bodies, what we can see is we get up in the day and we follow this daily circadian rhythm of the sun and the night. We rest at night, we're active in the day. But even in more immediate situation in cases, when we take a breath in, our nervous system activates, it charges up. It's as if a day activation comes about. Activation happens in many other situations. When the child and the baby at the mother's breast is looking at the mother and the mother's looking at the baby, both of their nervous systems rise to peak, and when they're finished, they settle. So the rising in the day and the settling at night is part of what has become a very popular term, or very elemental, in a very popular term in the psychological world these days, more so than maybe 20, 30 years ago, in fact, and that's called re-regulate and regulation. So our system regulates in the same way that the sun and the day regulates, and the same in the way in which all things under the sun, that's an expression, I know that, all things under the sun. And even the stone heats up in the day with the sun and cools at night. And that means there's activity and there's something going on in there, even though it looks still. The trees, the plants, some plants will follow the sun across the sky. What happens to our bodies as the sun moves across the sky, as it rises, as it reaches the peak in the heavens, and then settle? Different things take place with different lengths of sun rays that are both going to our body and through our eyes and affect our body by just simply being in them or shining on our skin. Hippocrates, who always is looked upon as being the father of medicine by so many across the world, he wrote many volumes on water, air, and places. And in that sort of very basic sort of work that he presented, he presented how important these things are. What happens in the sky, what happens in the sun, whether we're east facing and we get the sun coming up on our homes or where we live, or west facing, whether we get that morning sun or we get more evening sun, and so forth, whether we're in valleys, we're on top of mountains. All of these things are considered important, and all of these things were articulated to a very, very great degree by the Hakims. But back to this thing of the rising and falling and the settling. When we breathe in, activated nervous system. When we breathe in, our muscles contract. Even the capillaries on the skin contract. And when we breathe out, they relax and settle. Or they do not. And if we breathe in and we breathe in and we breathe in and they don't settle, then we're stuck with a hypercharge. We're overcharged. In some cases, we might look at that and see that that is an element in anxiety. Likewise, if there's too much settling and there's not enough activation, it doesn't come into being where we're excited and we're moving and our blood is circulating and our heart's beating, and we might also call that depression. Lack of enthusiasm, the lack of movement, the lack of activation. This business of activating and settling, activating that should happen. My teacher said to me, he said, we ideally learn how to relax between breaths. When we breathe in, when we breathe out. So this regulation happens or doesn't happen. And this happens in the body. One of the other basic hikmas that I point to is that, and I underline, along with this rising of the sun and the setting of the sun, is that Allah has placed our soul in this body. And in this body, our soul was placed by Allah's command when He asked the question, Alasta bi Rabbikum, am I not your Lord? And when we answered in the affirmative, that's when our soul was placed in our mother's womb. And that was the beginning of our life in this arena of earth, air, fire, and water, of samawati wal ard. The balance for us in all of these things, the balance of samawati, those elements that are up there in the heavens, fire, and air and the elements that are in our bodies, water, earth, and the admixture and the way in which they mix and the way in which they interact and the dynamic that takes place by Allah's command in us at every moment, and this balance that is sustained by Allah's command that keeps us alive. Anybody who studies physiology or has studied traditional physiology especially recognizes that we do not die from diseases or illness. We die in the end from irreversible shock in which we lose this balance and we can no longer sustain the needed balance that takes place. Good health is when we maintain that balance very well and very precisely. And we maintain that balance with all we take in, all we eat, all we do, all the things we spend time with. So rising and falling. The other thing that happens, our muscles contract, kabd, contraction, settling, relaxation, expansion, bust. Another thing that takes place all the time in our daily life, over and over and over, and over and over and over, we seek expansion, because most of our difficulties are contracted experiences, our states, our contracted experience. Most inflammation, most illness, most pain has a contracted element about it. And we seek that moment of relief. We seek it in the social arena. We seek it in many, many, many places. So our soul was placed in these bodies when we were in our mother's womb. They began to sense the experience of being in the mother's womb when we moved from being a clot to more human, moving in the direction of becoming a human. And then the first sense that we developed, in our mother's womb was a sense of sensation, the felt sense. We sensed that we were in this place and we could experience it to some degree. And the next sense that developed along with the felt sense was the sense, when I say felt sense, I mean the sense of touch. But what developed following that also has to do with touch and sensation and vibration, which is sound. So sound and hearing was one of the first things, although we do hear with our entire bodies. We hear with every pore of our body, and we hear, this is the central location of our hearing, but we hear our entire being, and that can be developed or not. All of these senses that we developed, starting with that felt sense and hearing in our mother's womb that continues through our life, all of these sensations or sensibilities, should say, we can develop or we can shut them down. So in the womb, our muscle groups begin to respond. Our body muscles are beginning to have action. They're not random actions. They're random, but they're particular responses to the sound of the mother's voice. So the mother's meme, the da, the ba, the ta, all of these sounds we begin to hear, and our certain particular muscle groups respond to those particular sounds from our mother. Already a very intimate, direct connection that we begin to have with her, and that we have with her voice as we come into this world, even more so. The man who researched this in the 40s, wonderful researcher, wonderful books, Alfred Tomatis, The Ear and Hearing, and he has other books, an autobiography that's wonderful to read about his research into understanding these things. And in that book, one of those books, he talks about a tribe in Africa. Often we look to these tribes in Africa to demonstrate very deep wisdoms and hikmas that we've kind of lost in the modern world, and things they did with their kind of deep insight. It's back to this thing that I've said before in lectures, which is quoting Mark Twain, who I call an American Hakim, when he said, "Isn't it amazing how all of the ancients were able to steal all of our modern scientific secrets?" And that's because in science, we're working towards catching up with these ancient wisdoms that we've forgotten and we covered over with a lot of ideas and misinformation and misaligned kind of thinking and understanding when we move further away from our fitra and we offend Allah's creation, and we offend our first nature, our fitra. We lose touch and we lose contact with common sense. We use this term, come to your senses. And I'll get into that more as I speak more about the somatic elements that we want to see, to want to look at. So this sound, the ability to hear, and our hearing is something we hear that takes place on our entire body. And I was just recently reflecting on two people who are musicians, one a very young one and one an older one who is deaf and another one who is very young, 12 years old, who when they sing or they play their music, they do it barefoot. And I often wonder, well, I know that with the deaf woman, she's doing it purposely so that she can hear a little bit more, including with the ears of her feet, we might say. So we were placed in this body and we began to respond to what happened with our mother's voice. And then we came into this world, and we came to this world in a typically somewhat traumatic manner. Now that traumatic manner does not have to be difficult. I know one woman who had half-hour labors, and I asked her about it, and she said, you know, I think I was able to do that because I read about the misogyny that found its way into the medical profession and obstetrics, in which men were suddenly writing about and saying, oh, childbirth is the most difficult thing you can go through. It's so difficult. And for you women out there that have had difficult labor, with due respect, I understand that you were not in a place where you were able to experience the ease of this. But this woman said she believed it was because she didn't buy into that whole belief. And she felt that it was so natural for her. And that attitude was something that enabled her to have a very easy, quick labor. And for her second child, she says, I really found it pretty easy. And it's not easy. You women know that. I mean, I don't know it, and I will never know, nor will any of you men ever know what that's about. We only know it from the outside. We can never know it, immediately. So many things happen. The body and what Allah has created in this body is so vast. I speak of it as a vast universe, and I take that example from people like Ibn al-Arabi and other scholars, my own sheikh in Morocco, and other scholars who recognize the vastness that takes place in the self. And it starts very early. It starts, even Ibn Sina, mentioned centuries ago, mentioned that what the mother's going through while she's pregnant is so essential and so important on what the outcome of that child will be. And he gives very specific examples of very subjective things taking place from what the mother was experiencing, and therefore what came out and that was imprinted upon the child. Nowadays, with modern science, we're beginning to recognize that more so, and the significance of that. This is something known just intrinsically by people who had innate wisdom and lived in an arena of wisdom. And this tribe in Africa that I was referring to, the mother, during her pregnancy, composes a poem that she sings. She sings a poem, a different line for each month as it develops. And the child is hearing this, and the child's muscular parts of the muscles are developing in response to that voice, but in the singing manner. And then when that child is born, not only she sings that to this child, but the whole community sings it. And when that child has difficulty, the community comes together and sings the song for that foundation of that child, that foundation of that child being in his body. So these wisdoms, we can take from these, we can use them as examples. We live in an odd time in which we can study all these historical things, and we can pick and choose from some and establish some and so forth. Sort of, it's what they call people who graduate from, and a lot of people add whatever they can from anything, and it's what they call graduates of MSU, make something up university. But in any case, these are also valuable and they are worthwhile. We must not underestimate that. And that goes to another hikmah, that's another very basic one that I'll articulate here, which is the Prophet ﷺ, he said that the hikmah, wisdom, is the lost property of the moment. And he has a right to it wherever he might find it. If he finds it in China and it makes sense and it's a hikmah, welcome to it. If he finds it in modern science, and much of the things in modern science are proving the things that we knew or things that were in our sunnah and in our traditions that we weren't aware of. So I'd like to talk more about that in other sessions here. But what I'm hoping is that happens with these videos is that you get a chance to look at them. I'll try to make them regularly. I'm not sure how often, maybe once a week, something like that, so that you can check in. And hopefully you'll get some of these things that I've shared with you, or I would like to share with you on one-on-one sessions. But since I've changed my practice somewhat and presenting these videos to more people, hopefully, I hope that you can listen to as many of you can so that you can use these things for your own understanding, to understand for yourself that your nervous system, your sense of being activates, charges up, and settles, and that there is such a thing as regulating this. The other piece I wanted to add into that in terms of the activation and the settling is these activations and settlings happen in the nervous system of the body. The nervous system activates itself. Electrical charges activate. The body, muscular part of our body contracts, expands, contracts, expands. And the point I'm making here is that this all happens in the body. And this is also linked to sensations, the felt sense being the first one that we experienced. But the felt sense has in its capabilities, by Allah's design, and listen carefully to this, the felt sense has innumerable variations. It's not just hot, cold, rough, smooth, etc., etc. It has as many possibilities as there are things in the universe. The felt sensation, that is, sensations we can experience in the body, has a number as great as all the things we can experience in the creation itself, the universe. And what my teacher in Pakistan, when I met my first Hakim that taught me, he said, you know, I learned medicine in the forest with my grandfather, and I'll teach you as much as you can take in and as much as I can. But the fact that he said he learned it in the forest was when I realized he was the teacher I was looking for, because he learned in the pattern of Allah's creation and the design and nature of the forest and the animals and all the plants and all the things that take place there. He learned the same pattern and the same principles that's true in our bodies and in our being and in ourself. And we want to use these principles wisely that we may progress on the way, inshallah. So the last thing I wanted to mention, and I didn't quite get to it, was that in the body we have these innumerable sensations, and amongst these sensations are these things we call emotions. Emotions also happen in the body. We can think happy thoughts, we can think sad thoughts, but until those thoughts drive feelings in the body, we cannot call it an emotion. All emotions we feel. And another way you can look at that is anytime you can say, I feel such and such, remember that it takes a body and that experience is taking place in this body, inshallah. So I pray for all of you that you make extraordinary progress on this path that you're on for healing or learning, whatever it might be. They're one and the same. Learning, healing, recovery, the spiritual path. I see all of these as one thing. One of the hikmas that I myself have articulated, and I believe is, you know, everything takes part in our health and well-being or our sickness. And there's nothing we can exclude from that. Nothing at all, as minor as it may seem, or as major as it may seem. All things take part in our wholeness and well-being or our sickness. And we'll go more into that in another video, inshallah. Please pray for us. Assalamu alaikum.